Welcome back to Reimagine. Here we are in our 9th iteration of the conference. For all those watching, thanks so much for staying with us. So much good content going on, so many good conversations that we're being able to have with people about, our current theme from this conference, the game of chains. That idea of looking at the different chains that are out there, looking what they're doing, and looking at the sort of, battle, but also the development and the synthesis that's going on in the ecosystem. This isn't all win-lose. There can be win and win together, although, obviously that depends on who we're talking to. In that being said, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Anne Fauvre-Willis, the Chief Operating Officer over at Oasis Labs. And firstly, thanks so much for being with us.
Hey, yeah, so happy to be here, Asher. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks to everyone in the audience who's here listening.
All right, and pleasure to have you on. And I think just to get things started, for those in the audience that aren't familiar with Oasis and what you guys are up to, give us the rundown, give us an overview of what you guys are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll speak to two parts of it. So first I'll say the Oasis network is a decentralized proof of stake network. Our primary goal since founding was to build a network that was that had confidentiality or privacy built into it, and also to make it scalable in a way that Ethereum is not. It uses a very unique type of scalability architecture that's very different from sharding and certainly different than Ethereum as it's designed today. We launched the network, or I should say the community launched the network in November 2020, and it's now fully decentralized. There's over 100 individual validators, all from different entities, based around the world. We have folks in China, Taiwan, Korea, Europe, across Europe, in the US, you name it. And so we have a fully decentralized network that we have a number of different applications running on today. And really excited to see that, really take shape. In addition to that, so that's the underlying network, Oasis Labs has built a development environment that sits on top of that we call Parcel. And Parcel is a easy to use development environment that basically allows for data management, the computation and analysis of data, and basically the tokenization of data as well, in a compute environment that connects to the Oasis network. And that development environment is really designed to be easy for anyone to use. So it's actually built in Typeform, so you don't have to know Solidity to work in it. You don't have to write smart contracts. A lot of that complication of blockchain is sort of stripped away, but the value that comes from tokenization and ownership and the public ledger that exists are all baked into the platform as well. And so that's one of the things I've been primarily focused on since launching the network.
So there are two, particular parts of Oasis and the sort of overall Oasis project that I think stand out. And, there are two parts that you guys really like to focus in on, that I'd like to get a little more sort of understanding and awareness of what they are and how the direction they're going in. So that's the privacy focus. You sort of advertise yourselves as a privacy focused blockchain. I'd be fascinated to hear a little bit more about how you guys implement that. Specifically on your network, and also the data tokenization, which I know is something that you guys are very keen on, distinguishing as a key, unique selling point of Oasis as a protocol.
Yeah. So it's good, and it's good to speak of them in that order because really one enables another. So I'll speak first to privacy and confidentiality. So first off, I'd say we think about this really at the core layer, or really at every layer of the network. And so it's one of really the only networks that does that. The way that we've built this is it's confidentiality at a contract level. So it's not simply about a transaction. So in comparison to something like Zcash or Monero, those are really private tokens. And so the idea for those types of platforms is the actual transfer is in some way held privately. Our network's actually, it's in some ways much more complex. It's not just the transfer that's held privately, it's actually the underlying data and compute. And so the smart contract, as you build it, can be made confidential. The data that is run through that smart contract can be held confidentially or not. And really what I'd say is that design permeates through every layer of the network. So the way the network works is there's a decentralized consensus layer. It's fully decentralized. I mentioned there's over 100 validators running that. and then a number of compute environments. And one of them that we'll talk about it has a core functionality of confidentiality. There are some that don't. But what's really nice about our network is that it's really designed to make it very easy to do. So it's quite simple to spin up a confidential development environment yourself, or to use one of the ones that already exists, because we've built a lot of the hooks in at every level of the network to make it quite simple to do that. And so you can imagine, and we have, on that level, broad development and confidentiality that ranges from things like data tokenization, which I'll go into, but also more confidentiality for DeFi related things. So if you think about private DEXs or private lending pools, those are things that are going to be really important for the future of DeFi. I mean, some of the issues we're seeing now in the DeFi space really are around the idea of front running and the challenges that exist with that from a trading perspective, or credits that has to be significantly backed by some sort of asset. And so having confidentiality built into a lending protocol or to DEXs specifically can really change the game and open up DeFi much more substantially than it is now. So that's sort of confidentiality overall, and really the high point here is it can be applied in a lot of different ways. From data tokenization, so that's really a unique use case that uses confidentiality. So the idea here is, I think of it a little bit like you think of NFTs. So when you think about an NFT, what you're doing is you're taking an offline asset and you're creating some, stored, essentially a token, right? It's a non-fungible token that represents a very unique set of value. And NFTs, as we think about them today, are really, I would say, like non-dynamic assets, right? It's a picture or a photo or some sort of image. And that's, I think, a really important and compelling first step. Data tokenization is really saying, what if we apply that same type of non-fungible technology and actually applied it to something that's backed by data? And so the idea of this is that you could essentially, the most base level, upload your data to our network, and you would be given a token that basically represents the ownership of that data. It's non-fungible. It can't be, tricked or replaced with anything else. It's unique in that way, and it represents the exact data that you've held and stored on the network. So what does that mean? I mean, that's sort of, who cares? But I think what that really then enables are a whole host of new use cases that, I think will really power the next round of what we call the ownership economy. And so I'll give you a couple examples of what that could look like. So on the more data-oriented side, and on the B2B side, you can see this data token almost being used as like an access token or, some form of like authenticator that you own that data. So imagine a world where you wanted to say, you have a genome or your genomic data, you want to share it with a pharmaceutical company for research, but you want to know that you will get that data back. You can use these data tokens to actually set some time limit to how long someone would be able to hold and use your data. You give it to them for 3 days, they can run analysis. When that time is up, you get it back. This is a great way to think about marketplaces, for example, where you're setting some time-bound limit on data analysis or, the rental of data to some extent. And so that's more of a B2B use case. What I find probably most exciting, however, are the more creator economy and creator-driven use cases. So right now we have all these like creator coins, but they're really not backed by anything other than sort of hype and excitement, right? Like I like an artist, they have a coin, maybe I buy that coin and it goes up in value. What you can do with our data tokenization product is actually have that value be ascribed to actual usage. So imagine an artist and they're a musician, they're a working musician, and you buy their token when it's, they're not as well known. They have 1,000 listens a day on Spotify. With our data-backed tokens, what it would actually do is you can actually use the data from Spotify to represent the underlying value of that token. So imagine that artist all of a sudden starts, having 1 million listens a day. The value of that token would actually be tied to the value of the number of listens. And so, that's where we come up with this concept of sort of like data-backed tokens. So anyway, I've shared a lot there, but I think as you can tell, it's probably something I'm really excited about it. And I think there's a lot we can do with this and just getting started for sure.
No, absolutely. And you know what? It's been so fascinating over the course of this conference. I've spoken to so many people who've spoken about that idea of the lag between, the digitization of everyone's lives and the digital ownership going on in people's lives, and that digital ownership hasn't yet caught up. It sounds to me like what you guys are doing are looking to help change that equation so that the digital ownership does actually catch up with
Yeah.
the fact that we all spend what 40, 50, 60, let's not admit to too much, percent of our time online these days as it is. And yet, most of it's, using as a service products or renting products, as it were.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so true. I mean, I think if you look at the internet today, it obviously unlocked so much. There's so much that's been unlocked by it, but Web 2.0 also has a number of flaws. And I think one we can all agree on is how the monetization of the internet works. So much value is held by these big companies. And a lot of that is because they're able to amass such large amounts of data. And we as users don't really get any of the value back for helping or for feeding into that system. We get access to the product, but there's a lot that I think many of us have essentially signed on to in a way that we hadn't anticipated, or the ramifications of it we haven't expected. I'd say in addition to that, like one thing that really motivates me is I think we also live in a world in Web 2 where we're sort of forced to trust these companies. Like, and even if you think they're the most trustworthy, there's still an element of trust you have to put in, and your incentives may not be aligned. I think Apple, for example, is an incredibly respectful company when it comes to data privacy, but I have to believe that, right? Like, there's so much data that I'm giving them and taking their word that they're going to use it in the right way. And so I think what's so empowering and powerful about Web3 is it really shifts the financial model. It shifts the trust model to really put us as individual users back in control of how we use our data and how it's monetized. And I mean, up until now, that just hasn't been a choice. Like, it's use these products or disconnect from the world. And so, yeah, I'm incredibly compelled to see what will happen in the next 5 years as blockchain technology becomes more mainstream.
But what do you think? I mean, I wonder with something, like the sort of data ownership that we're discussing here, what do you think the uptake is really going to be? And obviously, giving the choice is the first step, and that's incredibly important. But, when you start talking about uptake and who's actually going to take that extra step, particularly if it takes 1, 2, 3 extra steps. I mean, we see that at the moment with, whether it be cookie access or, the most basic sort of privacy and data elements, that unless you stick the button in someone's face and it's a binary yes, no, most people are not going to go hunting through the settings to ensure that they're making sure their data is as private as it possibly can be. And obviously, as I say, giving the choice is so important, but what do you think of that next level of getting people to actually take up that choice and get a call to arms?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And I think it's a convergence of a few things. So I like to think about it as sort of like the regulatory landscape, the technology landscape, and then also usability. And so I think what we're seeing now is the beginning of that converging, which is in countries across the world. Obviously, Europe's been a leader, but we're seeing the US take a more thoughtful stance here too. There's regulation that's being put in place to set more restrictions and requirements around how data is used. The second is, up until now, we didn't really have some of the technologies to actually enable the type of data privacy and ownership that we talked about. I mean, blockchain is that example in many ways, but there's other confidential technologies that are really important, I think, in driving this new world. So things like differential privacy, moving from some like a research phase to really something that can be productized at scale, like that's just beginning to happen. And then third, I think on top of that, and really to your point, like it has to be easy to use. Like, I think it's really not a choice for people if they have to choose between a simple, user flow that's really well designed where something may use their data and something that takes 10 more steps or requires, in the case of anything on crypto, like a wallet with, some sort of like hardware key that you have, like that's an impossible choice for anyone to make. It's not a choice. And so I think when will we see this type of convergence, and when will we see this growth? It's when these three areas all sort of merge together. I think this will happen in the next few years, honestly. I mean, I think it's unbelievable to me to think about the type of even in the last year, like just a huge like set of innovation that's happened both in the blockchain space and also in the data privacy space writ large. And so I can only really envision how that will go even further. The last thing I'd say there is like, I do think there's some element of motivation and incentive that we have to give or allow people to have. In a world where you're thinking about paying, so we're seeing some trends that are leading to this already, right? So this move, for example, from like ad-based platforms to subscription-based platform is a great way of showing that, like, to some extent, people are willing to pay to avoid that type of data capture. But I think for it to hit mass adoption, we'll need to see a world where the incentives are more aligned to the individuals. And so my guess is that's most tied to them actually being paid in some way for their data or capturing the value of their data in a more reasonable way. And I think there'll be some other aspects as well. It might be that the underlying companies who are data private find their own revenue streams, and so that they can offer a competitive product that's also free, for example. That would be another option. But I think that's another really important aspect of this as well. But yeah, I think if you look to the next 3 to 5 years, I think we'll be in a very different place.
Yeah, certainly a period of great innovation, a period of great change, and a period of great diversity. Yeah. And I think that segues nicely into another topic I want to hit on, which is, we've seen this conference, Game of Chains, and I think it's very suited to the time that we are now, in which there are so many different projects, protocols, both layer 1, layer 2, and beyond, they're out there attempting to achieve, and this is an interesting point, whether to call it supremacy, whether to call it increased functionality, whether it's interoperability, what the goals are. So as a representative of a project and a protocol that isn't considered obviously one of the current leaders in the space, what do you see as the role of diverse networks and protocols out there, and the role of, you can obviously focus in on Oasis as your guys' role in the current space, crypto space?
Yeah, I guess I'd say a few things. So first, I'd say I'm what I would call a crypto moderate, which is to say that I'm not a Bitcoin maximalist. Obviously, I'm also I believe that there's a world where you can have many tokens and many networks working together. I don't think that's infinite. Like, there's some limited number, but I do think it's certainly greater than an N of one. And so, for me, what it comes down to is where are you adding unique value? And so I think there are a number of projects that are out there trying to be Ethereum killers. I respect a lot of them. Like, it's incredible to see what projects like Solana have done, for example. But I also don't think there will be that many that fall into that category. I think that the more valuable and more likely mature space is that you have projects, similar to the internet today, that are offering some unique, they're serving some unique need, and they're solving a unique problem. And so in that world, you have, general purpose things. You look at the world today, you've got general purpose platforms like AWS that does absolutely everything. And then you've got more specific platforms like Snowflake that are really good at, specific aspects of data management. Both are very successful, both have really strong ecosystems. And so when I think about the future of Web3, to me, that's where we'll end up. And so why do I feel bullish about Oasis, and why am I so passionate about it? Is because I think really no one has figured out privacy. And it's an incredibly important aspect of how these networks will converge. I mean, the idea that you're going to have businesses running on a fully public network, where every piece of data that they run or analyze on the network, to me, feels very unrealistic. And so providing an environment where you can do things confidentially, where sensitive data like healthcare data is actually being able to be stored on a blockchain network. There's so much benefit to that, but there has to be confidentiality baked into that. Trading as well, as we mentioned, like any sort of DeFi aspect, like there's real needs for confidentiality that exist in the current finance world, and I think will be necessary for us to get to mass adoption in the Web3 world. So yeah, I think I don't think we'll be in a place where every network survives, but I think there is a world where you have many hundreds that are all working together, and there's some level of interoperability. The other thing I'd say, which I think is so cool about this space, just in general, is you never know, right? Like, I think there's so much it's so cool to see, like, and again, like anything could change, but it's been really cool to see the projects that have just surged in the last couple months, and those that sort of ebb and flow. Like there's some projects that like I've been following for a long time, and they just consistently stay here, right? Like I'm always impressed with the Cosmos team, like what they've been able to do, and they just are always, they're so reliable, right? Like they're always going to be there. And then there are projects that seem like they just kind of shoot out of nowhere, and they've, you know, it's like the timing worked, they launched, everything's sort of working, and all of a sudden you can see this sort of like just like rocket ship take off. And so I think that's one of the cool things about the space is it's so early that you really, it's about being in the game and making sure that you're building great products and making sure people see them and know them. And you know, I think that the rest will come from there.
Yeah, absolutely, and I completely take your point. You know, about seeing how projects can, you know, come and go and build and shrink, and those that are steady and not. But I suppose, you know, to me, it's so interesting to see that the idea of sort of, you know, fidelity and you know, durability are so important when it comes to this space. And obviously, everyone's going through that challenge right now. You know, no one's older than 12 years at most, and most projects are considerably younger than that. Yeah, considerably. Oh, Bitcoin. You know, I'm saying everything else is considerably younger than that. So, you know, that proof of fidelity, and I think what you spoke about there about sort of what enterprise needs, you know, that if you're going to get these sort of, you know, business solutions that are going to help enterprise, you're going to need privacy, because most enterprises are afraid to put their information out in the public blockchain, you know, anything that's sort of limited like that. So what do you think can be done to bring that trust in?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Sure. Yeah, I mean, at first I was just gonna say, like, yeah, to me, I've always thought about this industry as a long-term thing. Like we're like not even through the first inning here, and so there's so much development and user experience and talent that I think we'll see grow and change the industry as we know it today. I think 5 years from now it'll be just a totally different landscape than it is now. For us, yeah, we've been very focused on enterprise and B2B specifically. And so we've seen usage from a number of companies of different sizes. So I'll give a few examples. We work with the BMW Group on a project around data privacy specifically. We've been working with them on some things related to differential privacy, the data that they capture from in their own vehicles, and really helping them think through how they'll take that data and give it back to their users, make it much more to allow and create better permissions for them in the network as well. So that's been a long-term relationship that we've had for some time and are working with quite actively. We also worked with a healthcare company in the US. I unfortunately can't disclose the name, but a very large healthcare institute. And basically what they were trying to do in pre-COVID was figure out how to share flu data that they were receiving in their own hospitals with county health departments. And the issue here is that, like, basically health data, I mean, there's so much regulation around it, and there's a lot of questions around ownership of that data. And so they really wanted to be able to share this data without actually giving up ownership of it. And so using a public blockchain that had confidentiality baked in was really a very effective way for doing that. So those are some of the, I think, early use cases we've seen. We also work with a number of smaller teams. Nebula Genomics is a good one. They're a genomics company, and they wanted their users to be able to control their genomes specifically. And so they can basically store it on the network. They can take it back at any time if they don't want the company to have access to it. And they're working even on something, you know, even cooler, which is basically an NFT of your genome. And so just another example of this data tokenization idea. So yeah, lots of things in that world. And you can see more of those obviously on our website at oasislabs.com. But I think, yeah, we're here for a long-term view of how to actually, you know, bring this technology to become the nascent technology of the future.
I mean, you know, talking about something like, you know, the health data example you just gave, do you envisage, you know, looking into the trends of the future, and let's say that, you know, the blockchain, you know, privacy-focused blockchain becomes a, you know, a widely distributed and utilized technology? I mean, do you imagine, and is Oasis's vision that people will become sort of their own, you know, data banks? I don't know if that's quite the right term to use, but, you know, their own controllers and repositories of their data out into the world, and they'll sort of retract and allow data in and out as they see fit. and that they'll
Yeah.
manage that individually. I mean, I know we've sort of touched on this already, but it's just such a fascinating idea
Yeah,
to me
yeah.
to see how that works in
Yeah.
practice.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So I don't think it's scalable that everyone will want to do that for themselves. Like, I think as we've learned, we're all, myself included, a little lazier than we think. But what I do think you'll see are what I would call sort of like data custodians, which is the idea that some people, think of it almost as you think about your own assets, right? So when I think about the money that I hold, some people want to invest it themselves and they spend a lot of time doing that directly. Some people hire people to manage their money for them, and some people use some sort of automated service. I expect that there will be some future world for your data as well, where some people will feel they want as much control as possible, and others will want to hold ownership, the custodial control of that data to someone else, essentially to set rules or bounds that custodian can then use to find the best use of their data. And so, yeah, that's really what I envision for the future. And I think you're seeing that a little bit with some of these data marketplaces already, where people are starting to upload and add their data to systems and to set those types of rules. And I think we'll only see more of that going forward.
Absolutely. And as with any network, when you're building these projects and putting your ideas out there into the world, I think at the moment, the two most important and interrelated elements of any sort of network building are, of course, the community itself that forms around the network, and in the case of blockchain,
Yeah.
of course, the developers that come on board and work and give that developer mind share, which is such a limited commodity in our current world. How are you guys finding that? Are you getting the community support you'd hope for, and are developers willing to come on board and develop on Oasis?
Yeah, so I think we've seen a lot of excitement from the community. I'd say on that front, again, very focused on trying to drive excitement amongst people who really care about privacy. And I think what's been cool about that is we've seen community from, I think, the more traditional crypto, channels, but then also a lot of people coming from the more mainstream or more technical backgrounds. So we have a ton of people in our channels who are really just passionate about privacy, and we're the first really to introduce them to crypto and blockchain. And so that's been a really cool thing to see. We have a great core set of about 300 ambassadors, shout out to them. And they've been great advocates for us. And then obviously a much larger set of communities that we do things like grants with. We do weekly, challenges and quizzes with. We have a bunch of community cup style competitions that we do with our community. And so that's been very exciting. The other thing I'd note for your audience specifically is we also have a very vibrant university program. And so this we found is a great way to engage teams really across the world. Our goal is really to focus and work with university clubs. And the reason we wanted to do that is we wanted to interact directly with students. We have a lot of PhDs and professors who are on our team, and so they love the opportunity to mentor and teach students. But essentially, the program allows for a few things. One is an opportunity to set up a validator node on the network, and basically to get some tutorial of how to do that. And there's some staking rewards and benefits that come out of that. Two is mentorship, so an opportunity to get technical guidance and support from our team. Early access to the code that we have, sort of a fast track to grants and other programs that we have on board, our hackathons as well. And then we run a number of sort of trainings and education programs just for university students who are involved in this as well. So if you're out there and you're interested and you are part of a club at a university, reach out to us. It's actually run by our foundation, oasisprotocol.org. But you'll find information there, and we're always excited to have more university teams involved. So it's a great way to think about it. The last thing I'd say is for developers, yes, we've seen some great excitement. Again, what I'd say is what's been cool about this is we've seen excitement from some more traditional crypto teams, particularly on the DeFi side, but also from a number of, I would say, traditional companies that are what I call blockchain curious. They've heard about the benefits, they're interested in some aspect of tokenization, but they're not quite sure what to do with it. And I think our development environment Parcel offers a really easy to use, very welcome environment where it's quite simple to set up your application. So we've seen a lot of growth there. We have over 50 companies building on us, not just individual developers, but companies, and a whole host of other individuals that are building and testing it out every day. And so that's been very cool. If you're interested in that, there's a grants program to support development on that as well. So yeah, lots of ways to get involved.
Fantastic. And I hope that many more companies and individuals continue to grow and become blockchain curious into the future. A great term. I'm going to start using that all over if you don't mind. Fantastic. But regardless, and I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. You know, talk about your project, talk about the community. I think there's so much value to share there. I just want to say a quick shout out for our audience. You know, make sure you keep watching and get all your information on more great interviews at the conference at ri2020.io. But I always like to give our guests sort of the last word out. Anything you'd like to say out there to the audience, the world, guests, your mother, whomever it might be, anything you'd like to finish off on?
No, I just say thanks so much for listening. And if you're interested in learning more about Oasis, go to oasisprotocol.org, or you can follow me on Twitter. It's Annie Fauvre, ANNIE FAUV. Follow me there. I send a number of updates every day about the network. So hope to catch many of you there. Thanks so much.
All right, wonderful. Thanks so much for watching.